The nurse looked at my name, then everything changed. She froze for just a second, barely noticeable. But after 68 years of raising children and reading faces across kitchen tables, I noticed. Then she looked at my daughter-in-law. And suddenly, the room went quiet. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I never imagined a routine hospital visit would unravel everything I believed about my family. That Tuesday morning had started like any other. Gray clouds hung low over Indianapolis, and the rain tapped softly against my windshield as I drove myself to St. Vincent Medical Center. My hands ached from arthritis gripping the steering wheel, but I refused to ask my son Daniel for help. He and his wife always seemed so busy lately. Besides, I'd spent most of my life taking care of myself. The chest pain had started 3 nights earlier. Nothing dramatic, just a dull pressure that settled beneath my ribs whenever I climbed the stairs or carried groceries. At my age, every ache feels like a warning, but I kept telling myself it was probably stress, or exhaustion, or simply getting older. Still, my neighbor Patricia insisted I get checked. "You don't ignore chest pain at 68, she'd scolded while standing in my kitchen holding a casserole dish. That's how widows become obituaries. So there I was, sitting beneath cold fluorescent lights while nurses moved briskly through the emergency intake area. Daniel arrived 20 minutes later with his wife, Vanessa. My son looked tired. Expensive suit, loosened tie, eyes glued to his phone between every sentence. Vanessa, on the other hand, looked perfectly composed in cream-colored slacks and a tailored wool coat that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "Mom, you should have called sooner," Daniel said, kissing the top of my head distractedly. Vanessa squeezed my shoulder gently. Too gently. "We're here now," she said. "Don't worry about anything." I remember thinking how strange her voice sounded. Almost rehearsed. The nurse finally called my name. "Margaret Ellis?" I stood carefully, wincing slightly as pain tightened across my chest again. Vanessa immediately stepped beside me before Daniel could move. "I'll help her," she said quickly. The nurse led us into a small examination room, separated by thin curtains and pale blue walls. She clipped a monitor onto my finger and began typing information into a computer. Then she paused. Her eyes moved from the screen to me, then to Vanessa, back to the screen again. Something shifted in her expression. Not pity, not confusion, recognition. "You're Mrs. Margaret Ellis?" she asked carefully. "Yes," I answered. The nurse swallowed slightly before forcing a polite smile. "I just need to confirm something in your file." Before I could answer, Vanessa stepped forward. "She gets confused with paperwork sometimes," she said lightly. "I usually handle most things for her now." The nurse's fingers stopped moving across the keyboard. I felt my stomach tighten. Confused? I turned slowly toward my daughter-in-law. "I handle my own paperwork," I said quietly. Vanessa laughed softly, the kind of laugh people use when trying to smooth over tension at dinner parties. "Of course you do, Margaret. I just mean the medical forms can be overwhelming." "Margaret." Not Mom. Not even Mrs. Ellis. Just Margaret. The nurse looked uncomfortable now. She glanced once more at the screen before lowering her voice. "Mrs. Ellis, did you know someone already filed long-term care authorization papers under your name last month?" The room became so silent I could hear the steady beep of my heart monitor beside me. Daniel finally looked up from his phone. "What papers?" he asked. But he didn't look at me when he said it. He looked at Vanessa. Daniel's face changed instantly. Not shock, not confusion, fear. It appeared for only a second before he masked it, but a mother notices those things. Especially a mother who spent 30 years raising a boy alone after his father died in a construction accident on an icy highway outside Louisville. "What authorization papers?" he repeated more carefully. The nurse looked uncomfortable now, like she had accidentally stepped into a private family argument. Vanessa recovered first. "Oh," she said with a soft laugh. "Those papers." She crossed her arms casually, but I noticed the tightness around her mouth. "We were only gathering information in case Margaret ever needed assisted living later on. You know how hospitals are. They ask endless questions. Assisted living." The words settled into my chest heavier than the pain had. I stared at her. Nobody discussed assisted living with me. Vanessa tilted her head sympathetically, the same way people speak to nervous children. "Well, not directly. We didn't want to upset you unnecessarily." "Upset me?" as though my own future had become something to discuss behind closed doors. The nurse quietly cleared her throat. There's also a financial medical proxy listed here, she said carefully. Mrs. Vanessa Carter was named primary decision-maker if the patient becomes incapacitated. I felt my heartbeat quicken against the monitor leads attached to my chest. What? This time the word came out sharper than I intended. Daniel finally stepped forward. Mom, calm down, he said quickly. It's just precautionary paperwork. Precautionary. Such harmless-sounding words. But suddenly my mind began replaying moments from the past year. Small things I'd ignored because I trusted my family. Vanessa insisting on attending every doctor appointment. Daniel encouraging me to simplify my finances. The afternoon Vanessa offered to organize my filing cabinet while I was resting upstairs. 3 months ago, she'd even convinced me to add her name to my pharmacy pickup list just in case of emergencies. At the time, it had sounded thoughtful. Now it felt different. Cold. Calculated. The nurse looked back at the screen again. There's also a note requesting cognitive evaluation follow-up. I blinked slowly. What? Vanessa answered before the nurse could speak. Oh, Margaret, don't make this into something dramatic. We've all noticed the forgetfulness lately. Forgetfulness. The room suddenly felt smaller. Hotter. I looked at Daniel, waiting for him to correct her. He didn't. Instead, he rubbed the back of his neck the way he always did when avoiding conflict. Mom, you did forget your debit card at the grocery store last month. I stared at him in disbelief. One time. And you got confused driving to Emma's piano recital, Vanessa added gently. I took one wrong exit. But it worried us. Us. That word again. Like decisions about my life had already become group discussions I wasn't invited to. The heart monitor beside me began beeping faster. The nurse stepped closer. Mrs. Ellis, try to relax. But I couldn't. Because suddenly I remembered something else. 2 weeks earlier, my bank manager had called asking if I intended to add a secondary authorized user to my savings account. At the time, I assumed it was a scam call. Now my stomach twisted. I looked directly at Vanessa. Did you try to access my bank accounts? For the first time since arriving, her expression cracked slightly. Only slightly. But enough. Daniel immediately stepped between us. Mom, nobody's stealing from you. I never used the word stealing. That was the moment something inside me turned cold. Not angry. Not hysterical. Just awake. Because innocent people don't defend themselves before they've been accused. The nurse glanced nervously toward the hallway before lowering her voice. Mrs. Ellis, perhaps you'd prefer to speak with the doctor alone for a few minutes. Vanessa opened her mouth immediately. That won't be necessary. But the nurse was already looking at me. And for the first time all morning, someone in that hospital looked at me like I still belonged to myself. Vanessa's smile disappeared so quickly, it was almost frightening. Oh, come on, she said lightly. There's no reason for secrecy. We're family. But the nurse didn't move. Neither did I. For a moment, all 4 of us simply stood there beneath the harsh fluorescent lights while the monitor beside me continued its steady electronic beeping. Then the nurse spoke carefully. Hospital policy allows the patient to request private consultation. Daniel exhaled sharply through his nose. Mom, nobody's trying to hide anything from you. I looked at my son. Really looked at him. At 39, Daniel still had the same brown eyes he'd had as a little boy sitting at my kitchen counter eating cereal before school. After his father died, it was just the 2 of us for a long time. I worked double shifts at a pharmacy warehouse while attending night bookkeeping classes because I wanted him to have opportunities one never had. I missed birthdays, school plays, entire weekends. But I never regretted it. Daniel was my life. Which made this hurt in a way I still couldn't fully explain. I'd like to speak to the doctor alone, I said quietly. Vanessa immediately grabbed Daniel's arm. We should give her space, she said, though her voice sounded tight now. Too controlled. Daniel hesitated before nodding stiffly. We'll be outside, he said. Neither of them looked happy about it. The second the curtain closed behind them, the room felt easier to breathe in. The nurse introduced herself as Carla and pulled a chair closer to my bed. Her expression softened. Mrs. Ellis, I need to ask you something directly. I nodded slowly. Do you remember signing long-term residential care documents last month? No. What about financial proxy authorization? No. Carla glanced toward the curtain before lowering her voice. The signatures look inconsistent. A chill moved through me. Inconsistent how? She hesitated carefully. clearly choosing her words. I'm not accusing anyone of fraud, but I've worked in geriatric care for 22 years. Sometimes families become overly proactive. Overly proactive. Such polite language for something ugly. I stared down at my hands resting in my lap. The veins looked more visible lately. Thin blue lines beneath pale skin. Old hands. Hands that packed school lunches. Folded work uniforms. Held my husband's fingers in hospice, while cancer hollowed him down to almost nothing. And now apparently those same hands were being quietly erased from decisions about my own life. Carla handed me a clipboard. These are copies of the documents attached to your intake profile. I flipped through the pages slowly. Medical authorization. Emergency care instructions. Residential evaluation recommendations. Then I saw it. My signature. Or at least something pretending to be it. Margaret Ellis. The letters trembled unnaturally across the page, awkward and shaky like someone trying too hard to imitate an elderly woman's handwriting. I felt suddenly cold. That isn't my signature. Carla nodded slightly, as if she already knew. There's more, she said gently. She turned to another page near the back. A highlighted section caught my eye. Patient demonstrates increasing memory instability. Family recommends transition planning for supervised living within 6 months. My throat tightened. Memory instability. Supervised living. 6 months. I read the sentence 3 times before the meaning truly settled into my chest. They weren't just helping me. They were building a case. A paper trail. Carefully. Quietly. Slowly. I thought back to every small moment Vanessa had corrected me in front of others. You already told that story, Margaret. You must have forgotten. Let me handle it for you. At family dinners, she always laughed softly afterward, like she was protecting me from embarrassment. And God help me. Sometimes I'd even thanked her. A knock sounded softly against the curtain. Daniel's voice came through. Mom? The doctor's ready to see you. Carla quickly gathered the papers, but before she pulled them away, I placed my hand over the folder. I want copies of everything. Her eyes met mine. For the first time that morning, I saw something there beyond professionalism. Concern. Yes, ma'am, she said quietly. Then she added something that made my stomach sink even deeper. You should also know someone from your family has been calling repeatedly for updates about your cognitive evaluation results. I already knew who. The frightening part was realizing my son might not be the one behind it. The doctor confirmed my chest pain was caused by stress and elevated blood pressure. Stress. I almost laughed when he said it. He recommended monitoring, dietary changes, and follow-up testing. His voice sounded calm and distant, but I barely absorbed half of what he said. My mind stayed fixed on the folder Carla had quietly slipped into my purse before leaving the room. Copies. Evidence. Questions I wasn't ready to answer yet. By the time Daniel drove me home that evening, rain was falling harder across Indianapolis. Water streaked down the passenger window while soft jazz played. Low through the speakers. Nobody spoke much. Vanessa kept texting on her phone in the front seat. Daniel gripped the steering wheel tightly, and I sat in the back like an unwanted guest in my own family. When we pulled into my driveway, Vanessa finally turned around. You should really think about what the doctor said, she told me gently. Living alone may not be safe anymore. Safe. That word again. Everything suddenly seemed wrapped in concern. Concern about my memory, my health, my finances, my safety. Concern was becoming the perfect disguise. I've managed this house alone for 15 years, I replied quietly. Vanessa gave me a patient smile. That's exactly the problem, Margaret. You shouldn't have to anymore. Margaret. Always Margaret when she was irritated. Daniel carried my overnight bag inside, while Vanessa remained on the porch speaking softly into her phone. The moment she noticed me looking through the front window, she turned away. I said nothing, but something inside me had changed now. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house felt different. Not physically, emotionally. Every room carried memories that suddenly felt fragile. The hallway where Daniel used to race toy trucks across the hardwood floor. The kitchen where my husband Frank danced with me barefoot after paying off our mortgage. The small den where I spent countless nights helping Daniel study for exams while folding laundry beside him. I had built this life piece by piece, sacrifice by sacrifice, and somehow, without noticing, I had become a visitor inside it. Around midnight, I opened the folder Carla gave me and spread the papers across my dining room table. The signatures still looked wrong. Not terrible, just wrong enough, like someone had practiced. Then I noticed the dates. Most of the documents had been filed shortly after Thanksgiving. My stomach tightened. Thanksgiving. That was the same week Vanessa suddenly insisted I stop driving long distances alone after I missed one family dinner because of heavy snow. "You scared us," she'd said at the time. Daniel agreed immediately. Back then, I thought it was sweet. Now I remembered something else. During dessert, Vanessa had casually asked whether my will was updated properly. At the time, Emma had been setting the table while Christmas music played softly in the background. Everything felt warm, normal. I never imagined I was sitting inside a strategy meeting disguised as family dinner. I kept turning pages. One document listed emergency contacts. Vanessa first, Daniel second. My own sister Helen wasn't listed anywhere. Neither was Patricia. People who had known me for decades had quietly disappeared from my paperwork. Replaced. Managed. Controlled. Then I found another page near the bottom. Cognitive observation notes. My chest tightened as I read. Patient occasionally repeats stories. Displays confusion regarding scheduling. Family concerned about possible early memory decline. I stared at the words until they blurred. Repeats stories. What elderly person doesn't? Confusion regarding scheduling? I once mixed up a dentist appointment. That was it. But written down formally, the sentences sounded dangerous. Permanent. A trail. A narrative. I suddenly remembered Vanessa correcting me constantly in front of others over the past year. "Remember, Margaret? That happened in 2019, not 2020. No, you already told us that. Maybe write things down more often." Tiny comments. Small humiliations. Never cruel enough to confront directly. Just enough to slowly plant doubt. Even worse, sometimes Daniel joined her. Not maliciously. Weakly. Like a man too exhausted to question the person standing closest beside him. I sat alone at the dining table until nearly 2 in the morning. Rain tapped softly against the windows. And for the first time in my life, I asked myself a question I never thought I would ask about my own child. How long had this been happening behind my back? The next morning, I made coffee before sunrise. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the clock above the stove. I stood by the kitchen window holding my mug with both hands, watching rainwater drip from the bare tree branches outside. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those papers again. Memory decline. Supervised living. Financial proxy. The words circled my mind like vultures. At 7:30, my phone rang. Vanessa. I let it ring twice before answering. "Good morning, Margaret," she said brightly. Too brightly. "How are you feeling today?" "Tired." "Well, Daniel and I talked last night, and we think it might be best if one of us starts staying over a few nights each week." I stared at the steam rising from my coffee. "That won't be necessary." A pause. Then her voice softened into that careful tone she always used when pretending to be patient. "We're only trying to help." Help. I was beginning to hate that word. "I appreciate the concern," I replied quietly, "but I'm fine." Another pause. This one longer. Finally, she sighed softly. "Well, maybe we should still discuss future plans soon. Just in case." Future plans. As though my future had already become a committee project. After we hung up, I carried the folder into the living room and sat beside the fireplace Frank built 20 years earlier. The bricks were slightly uneven because he insisted on doing everything himself. Contractors rush, he always said. Frank trusted very few people. Strangely, I suddenly wished I'd learned that from him sooner. Around noon, someone knocked at the front door. Not Daniel. Not Vanessa. It was Patricia. She walked in carrying a paper grocery bag filled with soup containers and fresh bread from the bakery near her church. The moment she saw my face, her expression changed. What happened? I almost said nothing. Women my age are trained to say that, even when everything is falling apart. But something about the kindness in her eyes loosened the knot in my chest. So I told her, not everything, just enough. The hospital, the paperwork, the assisted living forms. Patricia listened quietly while placing soup into my refrigerator. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she closed the refrigerator door slowly and leaned against the counter. "Margaret," she said carefully, "I need to ask you something difficult." My stomach tightened. Last month, did Vanessa ask questions about memory care facilities? I looked up sharply. What? Patricia hesitated. My niece works at Brookside Senior Living. She folded her arms tightly. Vanessa toured the property about 6 weeks ago. The room suddenly felt cold. She said she was gathering information for her husband's mother. I didn't realize she meant you. I sat very still. 6 weeks ago. That was before my hospital visit. Before the chest pain. Before any doctor mentioned health concerns. They were already planning. Patricia continued carefully. She asked detailed questions. Margaret. Financing. Waiting lists. What legal documents were needed if a resident became resistant to moving? Resistant. The word made my throat tighten. Not unwilling. Not independent. Resistant. Like an obstacle. I stared down at my coffee table where Emma's kindergarten photo still sat in a silver frame. Missing front teeth. Curly brown hair. Tiny pink sweater. I used to babysit her every Friday night so Daniel and Vanessa could go out together. Back when they were saving for their first house, I paid their electric bill twice without telling anyone. When Daniel lost his job during the recession, I refinanced my mortgage to help them stay afloat. I never kept score. That's what mothers do. They give, and give, and give, until one day they realize the people taking from them have quietly stopped seeing them as human beings. Patricia sat beside me carefully. You need a lawyer. The words hung in the room heavily. For a long moment, I said nothing. Then I looked toward the hallway where family photos lined the wall. Birthdays, Christmas mornings, graduations, entire decades of love staring back at me from polished wooden frames. And suddenly, for the first time, I wondered how many of those smiles had been real near the end. I didn't call a lawyer that day. Not because Patricia was wrong. Because I wasn't ready to hear the answer yet. There's a strange kind of grief that comes when suspicion turns into possibility. Your mind keeps searching for another explanation. A kinder one. Something less final. So instead, I cleaned the house. I vacuumed the living room. Folded laundry. Watered the plants near the kitchen sink. Normal things. Small things. The kind of things people do when they're trying not to fall apart. Around 3 in the afternoon, Daniel stopped by unexpectedly. Alone. I watched his car pull into the driveway through the lace curtains in the dining room. For a second, my chest tightened the way it used to when he came home late as a teenager. Some instincts never leave mothers. He walked in carrying grocery bags. Thought you might need a few things, he said quietly. Milk, bread, eggs. The exact same brands I'd bought for years. For a moment, it almost felt normal again. Almost. I thanked him and started putting groceries away while he stood awkwardly near the counter. You should have called first, I said. I was nearby. A lie. Daniel never came nearby. My house was 20 minutes from his office in the opposite direction. I kept my voice calm. How's Vanessa? He rubbed his jaw tiredly. She's stressed. Interesting. Not worried about me. Stressed. I placed a carton of eggs carefully into the refrigerator. She seems very involved in my medical decisions. Silence filled the kitchen. Daniel stared down at the hardwood floor. She's trying to help. There it was again. Help. I closed the refrigerator slowly. Did you know she toured assisted living facilities? His head snapped upward instantly. That reaction told me more than words would have. She told you that? No. Patricia did. Daniel looked genuinely uncomfortable now. It wasn't supposed to mean anything serious, Mom. I studied his face carefully. The exhaustion beneath his eyes. The tension in his shoulders. For the first time, I noticed something else too. Fear. Not fear of losing me. Fear of conflict. Fear of Vanessa. You knew, I said softly. He sat down heavily at the kitchen table. We were just discussing possibilities. For when? In case your health declines. My health hasn't declined. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. That silence hurt more than an argument would have. I sat across from him slowly. When did you start believing I couldn't manage my own life anymore? Daniel's eyes moved toward the family photos hanging near the hallway. I don't know, he admitted quietly. Things just started adding up. What things? You forget stuff sometimes. So do you. That's different. I almost smiled at that. Not because it was funny, because it was so painfully human. Children spend their entire lives watching parents seem strong and permanent. Then one gray hair becomes 10. One missed appointment becomes a warning sign. One moment of exhaustion becomes evidence. And suddenly the people who once trusted you with everything begin discussing you like a fragile object. Daniel leaned forward, lowering his voice. Vanessa's worried someone could take advantage of you financially. I looked at him carefully. Vanessa tried adding herself to my accounts. His face changed immediately. Only slightly, but enough. She mentioned maybe helping organize things. Without asking me. She thought. No, I interrupted quietly. she decided. Daniel fell silent again. The clock above the stove ticked loudly between us. Finally, he sighed heavily. You're making her sound manipulative. I held his gaze. Is she? That question stayed hanging in the air a very long time. Daniel looked away first, and that terrified me more than if he had defended her. Because deep down, somewhere beneath the excuses and avoidance and exhaustion, my son already knew the answer. Before leaving, Daniel hugged me tightly near the front door. Too tightly, like guilt had weight. Mom, he said softly, just don't do anything drastic yet. Yet, such a dangerous word. After he drove away, I locked the front door and stood quietly in the hallway. Then I noticed something strange. The small filing cabinet near my office desk was slightly open. Just barely. I was certain I'd closed it the night before. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. Then I walked over slowly and pulled the drawer open. My will folder was missing. I stood there staring at the empty drawer for nearly a full minute. The folder was gone. Not misplaced. Gone. I checked the other drawers first, trying to stay rational. Tax records. Old insurance papers. Utility bills. Frank's military discharge documents. Everything sat exactly where it belonged. Except my will. My pulse began pounding slowly in my neck. The last time I remembered seeing that folder was 3 months earlier after updating my medical directives with my attorney, Richard Lawson. I had placed the copies neatly into a blue envelope labeled estate. I remembered it clearly because Frank always insisted important papers stay organized. Confusion helps dishonest people, he used to say. At the time, I thought he was overly cautious. Now I wondered if he had simply understood human nature better than I did. I searched the cabinet twice more anyway. Then my office closet. Then the bookshelf in the den. Nothing. By evening, anxiety sat inside my chest like wet cement. Around 6:30, Vanessa called. Daniel said you sounded upset earlier, she said gently. Of course he told her. I'm fine. You don't sound fine. I looked at the open filing cabinet across the room. My will folder is missing. Silence. Tiny. Brief. But there. Then Vanessa spoke carefully. Maybe you misplaced it. I didn't. Well, stress affects memory too, Margaret. There it was again. Always circling back to memory. Like she was laying bricks one sentence at a time. I know where I keep my legal documents. I'm just saying not to panic. Her voice remained calm, controlled, endlessly reasonable. That was what made it so unsettling. People expect manipulation to sound cruel, loud, obvious. But real manipulation often sounds patient, caring, concerned. You were here yesterday, I said quietly. Another pause. Yes, to help after the hospital. You went into my office. I brought in your overnight bag, not technically denying it. I sat down slowly on the couch. Did you take my will? Her inhale sharpened slightly through the phone. Margaret, that's an awful accusation. But she still didn't answer the question. The room suddenly felt unbearably quiet. Then, from the kitchen doorway, I heard a small voice. Grandma. Emma. I hadn't even realized she was there. Vanessa immediately changed tone. Oh, sweetheart, put Grandma on speaker. I stared toward the hallway where my granddaughter stood clutching her backpack and violin case. Daniel must have dropped her off for her piano lesson nearby, without telling me. Emma walked into the living room slowly, studying my face. You forgot, she said softly. Forgot what? Then I remembered. Wednesday. Every Wednesday for 6 years, Emma came over after school for dinner before piano practice. I had forgotten. For the first time in days, real shame cut through me. Not because of Vanessa. Because of Emma. I'm sorry, sweetheart, I whispered. It's okay. But her small voice sounded uncertain. Vanessa came back through the phone immediately. See? This is exactly what Daniel and I are worried about. The timing felt too perfect. Too convenient. I looked at Emma standing quietly beside the couch, and suddenly another memory surfaced. 3 weeks earlier, during Sunday lunch, Emma had asked an odd question while coloring at the table. Mommy says old people sometimes need guardians like kids do. Is that true? At the time, Vanessa laughed it off quickly. Now the memory made my stomach turn. I lowered my voice carefully. Have you been talking about me in front of Emma? We're preparing her emotionally in case changes happen. Changes. Everything was always wrapped in soft language. No one said removal, control, dependency. Just changes. Emma climbed onto the couch beside me quietly while Vanessa continued speaking about safety and future planning. But I barely listened anymore. because Emma's eyes had drifted toward the open filing cabinet. Then she whispered something so softly I almost missed it. "Mommy opened those drawers yesterday while you were sleeping." My entire body went still. Emma looked nervous immediately after saying it. "She told Daddy she needed to find papers before you changed your mind." The air left my lungs slowly. Not suspicion anymore. Not fear. Proof. Across the phone, Vanessa was still talking calmly about assisted living brochures and support options. Meanwhile, my 8-year-old granddaughter had just destroyed the last piece of trust one still had left. I didn't confront Vanessa that night. That surprised even me. A younger version of myself probably would have demanded answers immediately, raised my voice, forced the truth into the open. But age teaches you something painful about betrayal. The louder people lie, the calmer you need to become. So instead, I kissed Emma's forehead, made her grilled cheese sandwiches, and helped her practice piano scales while Vanessa continued talking through the phone about supportive transitions and healthy next steps. I barely spoke, and I think that silence unsettled her more than anger would have. After Emma's lesson ended, Daniel picked her up around 8:30. He looked exhausted again, tie loosened, dark circles beneath his eyes. Vanessa stayed in the car. Interesting. Emma hugged me tightly before leaving. Then she whispered into my ear, "I didn't mean to get Mommy in trouble." I held her a little closer. "You didn't do anything wrong, sweetheart." But after they drove away, I locked the front door and stood in the dark living room for a very long time. The house no longer felt peaceful. It felt watched. Around 10 o'clock, I called Richard Lawson. My attorney answered on the third ring. "Margaret." His voice immediately sharpened with concern. Richard had been Frank's friend long before he became our lawyer. He attended our anniversary parties, came to Daniel's high school graduation, sat beside me at Frank's funeral 12 years earlier without saying a single unnecessary word. Reliable people understand silence. "I need to see you tomorrow," I said quietly. He didn't ask questions. "What time?" 9, if possible." "It's possible." That's simple. No hesitation. After we hung up, I carried the blue hospital folder into my bedroom and locked the door behind me. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened Frank's old cedar chest at the foot of our bed. The smell of aged wood and faint cologne drifted upward instantly. Inside were old photo albums, military medals, letters, and documents I hadn't touched since his death. Frank believed in backups. Copies of everything. Insurance policies, property deeds, trust documents. And suddenly I remembered something clearly. 3 years before he died, Frank insisted we place duplicate estate papers into the cedar chest after hearing about an elderly friend manipulated by relatives during dementia treatment. People change when money gets close. He told me that night while organizing files. Even family. At the time, I argued with him. Not about the paperwork. About Daniel. Our son would never do that. Frank didn't answer immediately. He simply looked down at the folder in his hands. "It's not always the child you raised," he said quietly. "Sometimes it's the person standing beside them." I remember being offended. Now the memory made my chest ache. My fingers trembled slightly as I lifted old folders one by one beneath the soft bedroom lamp. Life insurance, mortgage release, military pension records. Then finally, estate documents. Still there. Still sealed. Relief hit so suddenly I nearly cried. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the folder carefully. Everything remained intact. The trust, the house deed, medical directives, and most importantly, the original will. I stared at the signature page for a long time. Frank's signature beside mine. Strong. Certain. Nothing shaky about it. Then I noticed something else attached near the back. A notarized amendment I had completely forgotten. My heartbeat slowed. The amendment clearly stated that no power of attorney, medical proxy, or property transfer could be legally altered without direct verification from both my attorney and primary physician. Frank added it after his friend's family tried forcing him into assisted living. Protection. Layers of protection. Suddenly, for the first time in days, fear loosened its grip on my chest. Because Vanessa may have searched my filing cabinet. She may have copied documents. She may have started building a narrative about my memory. But she clearly didn't know everything. And that changed things. Completely. I closed the folder slowly and looked toward the dark hallway outside my bedroom door. Then I realized something else. If Vanessa had taken the copy of my will, that meant she was desperate enough to act before I discovered what she was doing. and desperate people make mistakes. The next morning, Indianapolis woke beneath a pale gray sky. I arrived at Richard Lawson's office 15 minutes early. The building sat downtown near Monument Circle, inside one of those old brick structures with brass elevator doors and marble floors worn smooth by decades of footsteps. Frank used to joke that Richard's office smelled like leather chairs and expensive mistakes. Strangely, it still did. Richard greeted me personally in the lobby. The moment he saw my face, his expression changed. "Margaret," he said quietly, "something serious has happened." Not a question, a statement. Inside his office, I handed him the hospital paperwork, the copied signatures, and the notes regarding cognitive decline. Richard read every page carefully without interrupting. The silence stretched so long I could hear traffic outside 4 floors below us. Finally, he removed his glasses slowly. "These signatures are fraudulent." Hearing the words spoken aloud made my stomach tighten anyway. Fraudulent. Not misunderstanding. Not concern. Fraud. Richard folded his hands together carefully. "Have you signed any recent revisions to your estate documents?" "No." "Any transfer authorizations? Financial powers? Property reviews?" "No." He nodded once. "Good." Then he leaned back in his chair and looked directly at me. "Margaret, someone appears to be building legal groundwork to establish diminished competency." The room felt colder, even though I already knew. Hearing it stated plainly changed something. Richard opened another folder from his desk drawer. Frank anticipated this possibility years ago. He slid several documents across the table. Protective trust clauses, independent medical verification requirements, property lock restrictions, safeguards Frank quietly added after his friend Harold lost control of his estate during Alzheimer's treatment. My throat tightened reading Frank's signature again. Even now, somehow, he was still protecting me. Richard continued carefully. "Your son and daughter-in-law cannot legally move you, access your property, or alter your medical authority without satisfying multiple conditions first." Relief washed through me slowly. Then another thought followed immediately behind it. They don't know that. Richard's eyes sharpened slightly. "No, and I recommend keeping it that way for now." I looked up at him. "You want me to pretend I know nothing? I want you to observe carefully before confronting anyone." His voice remained calm, measured. People attempting financial control often become reckless when they think they're close to succeeding. That sentence stayed with me. Reckless. After the meeting ended, Richard walked me toward the elevator personally. Then he paused. "There's one more thing." I turned back. "Yesterday afternoon," he said carefully, "someone called my office requesting copies of your updated estate paperwork." I already knew who. "What did you tell them?" "That I required direct confirmation from you first." My chest tightened. "Did they identify themselves?" Richard gave me a long look. "Yes." The elevator doors opened softly beside us. It was Vanessa. I drove home afterward with both hands tight on the steering wheel. The city blurred past in cold February colors while my thoughts kept circling the same realization. This wasn't panic anymore. This wasn't family concern. Vanessa had been actively trying to gather legal control around my life piece by piece. Medical authority, financial access, housing decisions, estate documents, everything connected. And Daniel knew enough to stay silent. When I pulled into my driveway, another car was already parked outside my house. Vanessa's. I sat frozen behind the wheel for a moment. Then I noticed Daniel standing near the porch steps arguing quietly into his phone while Vanessa paced near my front door. The moment they saw my car, both stopped talking. Interesting. Very interesting. I stepped out slowly, holding my purse close against my side. Vanessa forced a quick smile first. "There you are," she said brightly. "We've been worried. Worried enough to show up uninvited again." Daniel approached carefully. "Mom, we need to talk." I looked from one face to the other, then at the stack of brochures resting on my porch table. Brookside Senior Living. The same facility Patricia mentioned. Colorful pamphlets showing smiling elderly couples gardening beside fountains. I felt something inside me become very still. Not emotional. Not frightened. Certain. Because people only push this hard when they believe time is running out. And suddenly I realized something terrifying. They thought they were almost finished convincing me I was losing my mind. Vanessa picked up the brochures before I even reached the porch. Too quickly, like a teenager hiding cigarettes from a parent. "We were just looking at options," she said with a polished smile. "Nothing urgent. I unlocked the front door slowly. Then why are you both here waiting for me? Neither answered immediately. That silence said enough. Inside the house, the tension followed us into the living room like another person. Daniel stood near the fireplace with his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets, while Vanessa carefully arranged the brochures across my coffee table. Brookside Senior Living, Maple Grove Assisted Care, Silver Pines Retirement Community. My future apparently already had multiple options. I remained standing. I met with my attorney this morning. Vanessa's hand froze slightly against one of the pamphlets. Only for a second, but I noticed. Daniel looked up sharply. You called Richard? Yes. Why would you do that? Vanessa asked before he could speak. Interesting question. Not what did he say? Not is everything okay? Just why would you do that? I sat down slowly across from them. Because someone forged my medical paperwork. Daniel exhaled heavily. Mom, no, my voice stayed calm. You don't get to dismiss this anymore. The room became very quiet. Rain tapped softly against the windows again, the same way it had the day this nightmare started. Vanessa crossed her legs carefully. Nobody forged anything maliciously. Maliciously. There it was. Not denial. Just justification. I held her gaze. You signed legal documents pretending to be me. We were trying to protect you. From what? Neither answered. Because the real answer sounded ugly out loud. Old age. Control. Money. Convenience. Daniel rubbed both hands across his face tiredly. You've been forgetting things, Mom. I almost laughed again. The same script. Repeated over and over until they hoped it would become reality. I forgot one piano lesson. It's more than that. No, I replied quietly. You need it to be more than that. Daniel's face tightened instantly. For a moment, I saw genuine shame flicker across it. But Vanessa stepped in immediately. This isn't about attacking you, she said softly. It's about planning. Responsibly before something serious happens. I looked around my living room slowly. The family photos. Frank's old leather recliner. Emma's drawings taped beside the refrigerator. Everything I built. Everything they were preparing to reorganize without me. Then I reached into my purse and placed several papers onto the coffee table. Copies from Richard. Protective trust clauses. Verification requirements. Fraud documentation. Vanessa's expression changed the moment she saw the legal letterhead. Daniel leaned forward slowly. What is this? Protection, I answered calmly. Vanessa picked up one page quickly, scanning the text. The color drained from her face. You went through our private records? She asked sharply. Our. Not my records. Our records. Richard had warned me desperate people become reckless. Now I understood exactly what he meant. My attorney confirmed the signatures were fraudulent, I said quietly. He also confirmed nobody can alter my estate, property access, or medical authority without direct legal verification. Silence. Heavy silence. Vanessa set the papers down carefully now. Too carefully. Then she looked at Daniel. Not at me. At Daniel. That glance told me everything. She hadn't expected obstacles. She thought the groundwork was already complete. Daniel's voice sounded smaller now. Mom, nobody wanted this to become legal. I studied my son carefully. Tired eyes. Weak posture. Fear hiding beneath exhaustion. For the first time, I realized something difficult. Daniel wasn't leading this. He was following it. Vanessa suddenly stood. This is ridiculous, she snapped. After everything we've done for you. For me? I interrupted quietly. Her jaw tightened. Yes, for you. I nodded slowly. Then I asked the question that finally shattered the room. Did you take my will from the filing cabinet? Daniel looked confused instantly. Vanessa didn't. That was the answer. She recovered quickly, but not quickly enough. I have no idea what you're talking about. I leaned back calmly. Emma saw you. The silence afterward felt enormous. Vanessa's face went completely still. And beside her, my son finally looked terrified. Daniel turned toward his wife slowly. Emma saw you, he repeated. Vanessa recovered fast. Too fast. She's 8 years old, she said sharply. Children misunderstand things. But nobody in that room believed that anymore. I watched my son carefully. The color had drained from his face. His eyes moved between me, the papers on the coffee table, and Vanessa standing rigid beside the fireplace. For the first time since this began, Daniel looked like a man waking up inside a situation he no longer recognized. You went through Mom's files? He asked quietly. Vanessa folded her arms instantly. I was trying to find the updated estate paperwork because somebody needed to handle reality. Reality. That word landed heavily. You told me you already discussed all of this with her, Daniel said. I tried to. That's not what I asked. His voice wasn't loud, but it had changed. And Vanessa noticed too. She turned toward him slowly. Daniel, don't do this. Do what? Turn me into the villain because you're uncomfortable now. The room fell silent again. Then Daniel said something that surprised even me. Did you forge those signatures? Vanessa stared at him in disbelief. Oh my God, that's not an answer. She laughed once. Short, sharp, angry. You knew exactly what we were trying to do. Still not denying it. Daniel stepped backward slightly, like the words physically hit him. No, he said quietly. I knew you were looking into options. I didn't know you filed paperwork. Vanessa's composure finally cracked. Because nothing would ever get done otherwise, she snapped. Your mother refuses to admit she's aging. I remained seated, calm. That seemed to frustrate her even more. She forgot Emma's lesson. She mixes up appointments. She repeats herself constantly. So does every person over 60. I replied quietly. That's not the point. No, I said. The point is you decided inconvenience was the same thing as incompetence. Daniel lowered himself slowly into the armchair near the window. He suddenly looked exhausted beyond words. I can't do this, he muttered. Vanessa turned toward him immediately. What does that mean? He rubbed both hands over his face. It means this. Vanessa stopped breathing for a second. I saw it happen. Her shoulders stiffened. Her face drained of color. Even Daniel looked confused as I walked calmly toward the front door. Then I opened it. Richard Lawson stood outside beside a uniformed police officer. Not dramatic, not aggressive, just official. And suddenly the entire atmosphere inside my house changed. Richard gave me a small nod. Margaret. The officer remained polite but observant, his notebook tucked beneath one arm. Behind me, Vanessa spoke first. What is this? Interesting. Not hello. Not confusion. Fear. Richard stepped inside slowly. I advised Mrs. Ellis to formally document concerns regarding fraudulent legal filings and unauthorized access to estate materials. Daniel immediately stood. Wait, police. The officer lifted one hand calmly. At this point, sir, we're only gathering information. Only gathering information. The same careful language Vanessa had used for months. Funny how different words sound when consequences finally arrive. Vanessa's composure shattered completely. This is insane, she snapped. We were trying to protect her. Richard looked at her evenly. By forging signatures? She wasn't capable of handling things properly anymore. I noticed the officer writing something down immediately after she said that. Vanessa noticed too. For the first time all evening, uncertainty entered her eyes. Daniel looked physically sick now. You forged the signatures? He whispered again. Vanessa turned toward him desperately. You knew why this mattered. I didn't know you committed fraud. Emma's violin case still sat near the hallway bench where she left it earlier. Somehow that small detail hurt me most. Because children always end up standing closest to the damage adults create. The officer asked calmly. Mrs. Carter, do you currently possess any estate documents belonging to Mrs. Ellis? Silence. Then Vanessa made the mistake desperate people always make. She got angry instead of careful. She would have lost that house eventually anyway, she shouted. Do you know how much assisted living costs? Do you know what happens when elderly people refuse help? Elderly people. Not Margaret. Not family. Just elderly people. Like I had already become a category instead of a human being. Richard's voice remained steady. The issue isn't future care planning. The issue is unauthorized legal activity. Daniel sank back into the chair slowly, staring at the floor like his entire life had collapsed in one evening. And maybe it had, because betrayal rarely destroys only one relationship. It poisons everything connected to it. I walked toward the fireplace slowly and picked up the Brookside brochure from the coffee table. Smiling seniors beside flower gardens. Happy caregivers. Warm lighting. A sales pitch for surrender. Then I folded the brochure once and placed it back down. I spent 40 years building this family, I said quietly. I worked double shifts after Frank died so Daniel could finish college without debt. I refinanced this house to help you during the recession. I babysat Emma while you both built careers. Nobody spoke. I gave because I loved you. I continued. Not because I expected repayment. Daniel's eyes filled with tears again. But somewhere along the way, I said softly, you both stopped seeing me as a person. The room stayed completely still. Then I looked directly at Vanessa. You saw an aging woman living alone in a valuable house. Her mouth tightened. I turned to Daniel. And you saw conflict you were too weak to stop. That one hit hardest, because he lowered his head immediately afterward. The officer quietly asked Vanessa one final time about the missing documents. This time she said nothing, which was answer enough. An hour later, after statements were taken and Richard finished explaining next legal steps, the house finally became quiet again. Daniel lingered near the doorway before leaving. "Mom," he said weakly. I looked at him for a long moment. The little boy who once ran into my arms after nightmares was gone. In his place stood a grown man who let someone slowly dismantle his mother's dignity, because confronting his wife felt harder than protecting me. "I hope someday you understand what you almost helped destroy," I said quietly. He cried then. Really cried. But some grief arrives too late to repair anything. After they left, I locked the front door and stood alone in the silence. The house felt different now. Not broken. Recovered. Outside, rain had finally stopped. And for the first time in weeks, I could breathe again. Because they thought aging made me powerless. What they forgot was that I was still watching.